Okay, let's open it up for questions or comments.
I can ask because I have microphone because no one is.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Natasha, do you have the overview of indicators for somehow summarized per NALAS EU from members from EU countries and non-EU countries? Is there in some indicators clear difference between these two groups, or it's still mixed? Thanks.
Oh, it's working. Thank you, Maria. Well, no, not yet, but this is a great idea. We can do it next year.
Anybody else? Yes. Excellent.
Thank you. Evka Heder, Southeast European Center for Entrepreneurial Learning. Natasha, thank you very much for the excellent presentation. We would just like to share with you what we learned from our work with the local authorities and schools. Actually, all the countries are now preparing for the preparation for operational program for IPA 2, which has the big amount of money, so it's very understandable incentive, dedicated to human capital development, which then is linking us to the schools and their capacities to absorb this kind of big envelopes. Then this is linked with the local authorities, which are in charge for the budgets. And what we find out that there is still really low capacities and great need for competence training, how actually to manage this kind of funds. So with the dedicated budget line, that the money which are coming from this kind of envelopes are not spent for some other things and other issues. Actually, it's a great risk, what we find out through our work, to enable the capacities to absorb significant amount dedicated to human capital development through IPA 2 operational programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to comment or? No. Okay. Okay.
Okay, I'm Jan Meyer-Zading, University of Nottingham. I found the presentation really interesting just now, and it made me think about a presentation that I attended on Tuesday, so just a couple of days ago actually, at the University of Nottingham by a colleague of mine from Columbia University in New York. And she was looking at local governments in Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, and what she found is that often local mayors, elected mayors, were using local resources in order to mobilize support for political parties. And she found quite systematically that independent mayors were actually not relying on this kind of clientelist patronage type practices, while mayors that were supported by a national government party were very actively doing that. And this raises some concerns because, I mean, I thought it was very interesting how you presented it, and I wonder whether you have any observation in this respect. I mean, whether this form of biased favoritism at the local level actually exists, or whether there are mechanisms in place for accountability and monitoring to prevent this from happening.
Thank you very much.
It connects a little bit to your point as well.
Yes, yeah, let's collect the questions and then.
Natasha, I have a question for you regarding the local government budgetary data. And my question is, what can NALAS do in order to, let's say, put a pressure on national governments in order to publicize the budgetary revenues and expenditures of local governments, because this data is not transparent whatsoever, at least not in several countries in the region, and it's not accessible. I mean, although it exists, the databases exist in the Ministries of Finance and Treasury departments. So it's interesting, like one of the major issues that really I found very striking, for example, in Serbia, that the draft law on local government finance, that the law, the latest version of the law on local government finance, which was drafted by the working group of the Ministry of Finance, was basically drafted without any financial data. So the Ministry of Finance itself didn't want to give any financial data to the working group. So this is how the legislation is created. So my question is, what can NALAS do in order to put the policy pressure on governments to publicize the data so we can have really evidence-based policymaking process in local government financing?
Thank you. Anybody else? If not, you had
Yes.
2 questions.
Well, the first one about we call it, yes, the parties are becoming stronger and stronger, and also not only in these countries that you mentioned, in the others, Western Balkans too. And in the last years, 5, I would say, maybe more, it's becoming more visible, more and more visible. And so whether the mayor is and the councillors are decision makers, or the decisions are made elsewhere and they just follow, yes, it's like a cancer. And it's fighting it is part of a bigger battle that is going on now in Western Balkans, and I think the civil movement is getting stronger. So one of the solutions is in the associations. We have good and not so good examples. For example, in Albania, the situation got so bad that the association split, so we have socialist and democrat associations of local governments. And for years, the mayors were not even talking to each other about joint problems, about advocacy. And so we are trying now to consolidate the two as NALAS. In, let's say, Macedonia, the association is taking care, they are working very carefully to make decisions, to involve in the decision-making all political parties and somehow keep everything in order. But other than that, we haven't really seen other examples, because it's also an issue of the level of democracy in general in the countries. And Sanja, thank you for mentioning this. The first and the second edition of the report were extremely difficult to produce because of this. Not even the associations of local governments could have the data about municipal finances. And the data about the local debt is like a top secret. But each year it's more and more easy. And it gives some hope, because this is public data. And again, here I would put the associations of local governments as actors that need to be strengthened to do this. I know the Serbian Association developed a beautiful database, but it's still not put in action because the ministry doesn't feed it regularly. Doesn't feed it to the association. Similar thing is going on in Macedonia. So we are thinking about, let's say, it's a bridging solution. What we have as a database of 10 years of municipal financing in NALAS, we are going to make it web-based public data for all countries, and we call it Municipal Finance Dashboard. From that big database, we plan to develop a website for each association, and that website would have more or less the same indicators as the regional database, and they would be public. And we hope this will contribute, at least for the advocacy purposes of the associations, then for understanding. The associations have finance committees, and they discuss just anecdotal, just everyday problems, because they don't have analysis and trends. And for you researchers, we hope this will be a small contribution and will show examples that it's not such a terrible thing to have the data public, and maybe set a good example.
Thank you. More.
Yes, thank you, Natasha. I have an impression, at least when it comes to, for example, I got the whole data set for Montenegro, and all data was completely transparent and available, unlike situation in Serbia, unlike the database in Serbia, which I really had a strong impression that the reason behind was basically, let's put it straightforward, hiding the expenditure data. Because in the past 6 to 7 years, at least, after the onset of the economic crisis, there was a huge centralization of revenues and, on the other hand, decentralization of expenditures. So the central government was basically downloading certain costs and expenditures at the local level without providing compensation, without providing adequate funds. But at the same time, it was cutting revenues of the local government. So there's a serious, I think, vertical imbalance created. And we can see that both in Serbia and in Montenegro, but in Serbia is much more striking and visible. So, and this, as you mentioned, at the peak of decentralization, I think the ratio was something like 7.1% of GDP when it comes to share of local government revenues in consolidated revenues. And it's now 5.6, so which means that we have like somewhat 20% lower decentralization when it comes to both to revenues and expenditures. And I think it's a similar pattern throughout the Western Balkans after 2008, 2009.
Thank you. That was mostly a comment, yes. Any other questions? If not, do you want to say something at the end? Maybe final words? Or?
Well, there was no questions for me, so I don't know whether this was completely unclear. Yeah, no, so well, I would just like to thank you for your participation here. Probably Natasha has maybe still some comments, but I don't.
Well, thank you for the patience, and I think through the questions we opened the burning or painful spots. My idea was not to say that the local level is perfect, so they should do everything, but we need partnership and rethinking maybe many things in our countries and how the governance is set. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very nice. So thank you for presentations and thank you for discussion, and that's it.